Welcome to The Code, your guide to health and human performance. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Fix from Physio Room, a performance-based rehab facility here in Denver. On this podcast, we're going to explore the key areas of your life that impact your overall health and wellness, from sleep hygiene and stress management to nutrition, movement, relationships, and more. We bring you conversations with industry experts and top performers to share strategies they have for cracking the code on health and human performance. Now let's get to today's show. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Code. Again, as you know, I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Fix from Physio Room. Again, sitting in one of our office locations today, recording this awesome episode with Dr. Julie Foucher. Make sure you tune into the show notes for this episode if you want to check out her more extensive background. But she is a physician with Wild Health. She's a former CrossFit Games athlete, still quite an athlete herself. But Dr. Julie, thank you so much for jumping on this episode of The Code with me.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I don't know if I would say I'm still quite an athlete myself these days, but I appreciate that.
Well, absolutely. And, to share just like the tiniest little background, I think I'm going to get to know you a bit better on this episode through this conversation. But I met Julie at a continuing education event that I went to through ICE, the Institute of Clinical Excellence. This was at a CrossFit facility in Tennessee. And Julie was there leading a bit of the presentation and talking to us about her time at Wild Health. And so that's where we met in a fitness-based type of thing. And we got to do a workout together. And it was pretty fun. So that was about a month ago. Yeah. Yeah, it was great. Well, Julie, would you be so kind to share a little bit about yourself and share your background here for anyone that's listening to this?
Sure. So I guess I'll give you the overview. I grew up in Michigan. I was always very into sports, particularly gymnastics was my main sport growing up. And then I did track and continued gymnastics in high school. And also knew pretty early on that I thought I wanted to pursue a career in medicine. And so when I was in undergrad is when I first came across CrossFit. I was studying in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and learned about CrossFit in 2009. And it really felt like what I had been looking for ever since I finished high school and was no longer in an organized sport. It was something that was different every day. It was challenging. The focus was more on learning new skills and expanding what your body could do rather than what you looked like or how many calories you were burning. Sure. And I immediately felt at home when I walked into a CrossFit affiliate. And so at first I joined just to do it for fun, to get in shape for my own fitness and health. But pretty quickly I did some extra training and joined some local competitions. And next thing I knew, I was competing at the CrossFit Games a year later in 2010. And that was the same summer that I was also applying to medical school. So around the same time, I was pursuing these two different things. And I think the timing was sort of perfect because if I had started competing in CrossFit maybe a little bit earlier or waited a little bit later to apply to med school, I probably wouldn't be a doctor here today. I'd probably still be competing in CrossFit or somewhere in my career. But I'm so glad that it happened the way it did. And I was able to compete during half of my medical school training. And then I went on to finish med school and residency in family medicine, and finished my CrossFit Games career in 2015. And now I'm practicing with, as you mentioned, a company called Wild Health, where we do precision medicine. And we're really focusing on helping people optimize their health and really take a very personalized approach. So that's sort of my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love it. And it's so funny how like two huge passions of yours, the fitness and the CrossFit side and, wanting to go into medicine hit at the same time at that little intersection. And, it gets you thinking, like you sort of just said, like, what if this would have happened at a different time? Your whole future would probably have been a little bit different.
Absolutely. I think everything happens for a reason, and we all have our unique path, even though it doesn't make sense in the moment. Many times looking back, we connect those dots and it does. And I'm really grateful that it happened the way it did. And I, initially didn't think that my medical career had anything to do with my CrossFit career. I thought maybe I wanted to become a specialist, maybe even a surgeon. I was always very much a perfectionist and thought, let me just know one part of the body really well. But the more experience I had in CrossFit and the more I saw the power of CrossFit to really transform people's lives and create health in a way that was not happening in the doctor's office.
Yeah.
It made me much more passionate about prevention. And that's
Mhm.
what led me to study family medicine, which is a very broad, the most broad
Yeah, sure.
field that you can go into. And it was very much not a specialist, and at times can be very uncomfortable because you have to know a little bit about everything instead of being an expert in one thing. But
Right.
philosophically, I think it aligns well with CrossFit and this idea of caring for the whole person, and really looking at how we can optimize health so that we can prevent disease from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to go down that path as we, talk a little bit more on this episode of this podcast, because what you just said, at Wild Health, you guys use precision medicine to really try to dictate individualized care to optimize people's health. And to people that are listening to this that don't maybe already participate in, healthcare with a functional medicine provider or somebody that follows that kind of philosophy, they're maybe thinking like, what are you talking about? That's not what happens when I go to the doctor's office.
Mm-hmm.
Is, I sit in the waiting room for who knows how long. I heard from a client yesterday that who actually works at a physician's office that their doc was running an hour behind on their appointments. So say you sit in the waiting room for an hour past when your appointment was going to be, and then you get to see the physician for, I don't know, 10 minutes maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And you walk out of there with a prescription pad paper in hand and say, here, go to your local pharmacy and get this medication, and that'll hopefully improve your symptoms. Call me if you
Mm-hmm.
need anything.
Right.
That's what a lot of people's family medical appointments are like. So would you just sort of like give us an overview of like, how did Wild Health come to be? What is Wild Health? What's precision medicine? And what made you want to like move into more of this functional medicine approach when
Mm-hmm.
you got out of medical school?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the description that you gave was just really classic. And it's sometimes funny to think about, how did we get here? How did we get to a place where we are, really waiting for people to get sick, and then mainly using pharmaceuticals as our first line to address symptoms instead of really addressing the underlying cause, which is the foundation of functional medicine, is let's look for the root cause and address that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think pretty early on, I knew I didn't want to practice in that traditional setting. I was lucky that I was exposed to functional medicine pretty early on. When I was in medical school, I was at the Cleveland Clinic, and Mark Hyman, who is a well-known functional medicine doctor, came to start the Center for Functional Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic. And so I was able to really, I still very vividly remember the first time that he came to give a talk for us. And I didn't realize that they were opening a whole center. I just thought, wow, I think I've heard of this term functional medicine somewhere. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to go to this talk. And I remember there was no reason I wasn't going to be anywhere near the building where he was giving the talk. And I had to get up early, and it was not convenient, but I felt really called to go to this talk. And I went, and
everything
I walk
happens
in
for a
and
reason, right?
there's all these department heads there and all these important people. And lo and behold, not only does he describe functional medicine, which for me was such an aha moment of, oh my gosh, this is how medicine should be practiced.
Yeah.
But they announced the Center for Functional Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic. So it was exciting to be able to be in an environment where this was accepted, and where I had opportunities to learn from, some people who are at the cutting edge of the field. So, I knew that, once you see it, you can't unsee it. For me, it was like going to my CrossFit level 1. Once you see that, like, exercise for me was never going to be the same.
Sure.
And so I knew I wanted to practice that way. And luckily in my residency, it was also a very supportive, open-minded place to learn, where I was able to practice some of those things and learn and gain functional medicine education while I was going through my residency as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was shortly after residency that I got to know Wild Health. Wild Health
actually,
was,
hey, Julie, can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah.
I don't think I asked you, where did you, so you grew up in Michigan. Where did where did you study for undergrad and medical school and your residency and stuff? Where did you complete those things?
I did my undergrad in biomedical engineering at University of Michigan. So I grew
Mm-hmm.
up in Michigan,
Yeah.
but really always knew deep down I wasn't going to be an engineer. I was just not gonna cut out to be an engineer.
Yeah.
But I studied biomedical engineering because that was very interesting to me, problem solving in the context of the human body. And interestingly, that I'm talking to you, everyone would always ask, since I was into athletics, well, don't you want to do sports
Sure.
medicine? Or
Yeah.
I was never really mechanically inclined. So even studying biomedical engineering, I focused on bioelectrics.
Ah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I never really had that much of an interest in sports medicine. I was always much more interested in sort of the biochemistry and the physiology as opposed to the mechanics. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but interesting. Um, but then I went to med school and residency at the Cleveland Clinic. And
Got
so
it.
I was there in Cleveland for a total of 9 years. So I took a little bit of extra time while I was competing.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. Well, since I interrupted you, you said once you see it, you can't unsee it. You knew that's the way that you wanted to practice, and then you got introduced to Wild Health.
That's right. Yes. And Wild Health, it was started originally by two emergency medicine physicians. So
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Mike Mallon and Dr. Matt Dawson. And they had actually been doing CrossFit. They first did CrossFit when they were in residency together. And they were, very much of a biohacking type mind where they would just self experiment on themselves a lot. And there was a point during residency where they were both trying a keto diet and they were measuring their ketones and they were eating the same things. They had working the same shifts, same schedule. But for some reason, Mike's cholesterol went through the roof and Matt's looked great. And so then they started really investigating the impact of genetics. And they realized that there was a lot there that was known in the literature, but that was not really being utilized or incorporated in clinical practice. And so they just started experimenting more and more and learning more about all of these things that you don't learn in medical school, like the impact of our lifestyle, of our sleep, stress, exercise, nutrition. And they started practicing that way with family and friends, and then eventually opened this practice called Wild Health. And it's grown a lot in the last few years, but the focus is on what we call precision medicine, which is taking all of the data at our fingertips, realizing that every person is unique. We're unique genetically, but we're also impacted even more so by our environment, and looking at what are all of those environmental factors, whether it's how we grew up, whether it's our current stressors, what we're eating, what we're exposed to, how we're sleeping, all of those different things. And then all the data we have, whether it's our genetics, our labs, any wearable data that we can use, like, CGMs or HRV trackers or sleep trackers or blood pressure monitors or body composition testing, anything, any kind of metrics that we can get our hands on. And then we can create a very personalized plan for
Mm-hmm.
each patient based on that data. And from that plan, we can then expect to see some improvements. We're going to have objective markers that we're going to track to see if we're improving. And if not, then we're going to adjust the plan and keep moving forward. But the more data that we have on a person, the more educated our guesses are about where to start and what direction to go. And the quicker we can usually get to that sort of optimal lifestyle that supports health.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And it's so easy, I think, to understand hearing you say that, like how much that makes sense. Like, let's do a real thorough analysis of all the things that we can and use that information to help us make the best judgment calls and, educated guesses of what we should do next based on that data. But that's just not what the system allows. And that's not what most people get to experience, even though what you're saying makes perfect sense when you think about it, right?
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, with the healthcare system, the way that it's set up is that, you come in with a certain set of symptoms, and those symptoms are usually grouped into a disease,
Mm-hmm.
a disease with a name. And based on clinical trials with large groups of people to test whether, a certain drug or certain intervention works or not, we decide what the best treatment is for that disease or that grouping of symptoms. And that's what you would be prescribed from your doctor. And if that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work, then they'd go to the next line or the next
Right.
line. But the reality is that all those patients or people included in those clinical trials are all a little bit different. And that's why
Right.
in a lot of instances, we hear conflicting news all the time about whether, caffeine is good for you or it's bad for you, or fish oil is good for you or bad for you, or, the keto diet's great or a vegan diet's great. And it's largely because we're all different. So we all
Yeah.
respond differently. And so giving a sort of cookie cutter response or treatment to every single person is probably not the answer. And the more we're able to understand what makes people different and who's likely to respond to what, the better
Yeah.
educated we are, and the better we're going to be able to give the appropriate treatments. But also taking that one step further, we're not just looking for a treatment for the symptoms, we're looking at what's the underlying cause of those symptoms. And if we can support your body to then create health, then usually those symptoms will go away and not you. It's, you shouldn't need a treatment long term
Yeah.
in most cases.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, that is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you come on this show and talk about that, because this is so, I think, impactful for people to hear that, like, if they don't already know about this, that, I think they should start to learn and understand what functional medicine is. And this is the same type of an approach that, we take in our physical therapy or sports medicine type of clinic, where, a lot of times what happens in these higher volume clinics is someone goes in with knee pain, for example, when they get looked at through this lens of like, boom, we're going to treat your knee and we're going to give you like these 6 exercises to do. And maybe we'll dry needle your quad. But the issue might be coming from their lumbar spine, or maybe it's
Yeah.
their lack of thoracic spine mobility, or some other issue, root cause that's causing that symptom. And, that person may go to therapy for several visits, and then their knee pain may not go away. And they say, well, physical therapy didn't work for me. But
Right.
it's because that person's different than another person that walks in there with the exact same symptoms. Their root cause may be different. Their treatment needs to be different. But the system in our world doesn't allow for that either. So I think this is great. And what I love, I didn't even know the background of Wild Health and the gentleman that, created it. But there's such an interesting parallel between Wild Health and that they came from the emergency medicine world, because we have a good relationship here in the Denver area with a functional medicine office that I really trust and respect. And the provider who started that, he too came from the emergency medicine world and from the sports medicine world. And he says the exact same thing about you, or what you said about like, everybody's going to respond differently to like a different dietary approach or whatever. And he specifically used that same keto example as you said, where like some clients will follow a keto diet and their lab markers will look wonderful. And when he himself followed it, his cholesterol was like through the roof. He was feeling good, like his body felt good, but his labs did not look good. He's like, well, this is probably not, based on this data, the best thing for me to do. So let me change it up and see what I can figure out that's going to be more optimal for myself.
Right. Which is, it's hard to assess. There's so many things out there. There's so many interventions, and especially with nutrition, there's always the latest diet trend. And it's hard to know, we can go off of how we feel. And I think ultimately that may be, most important, but I think that there's a lot of information that we can glean from things like lab markers and tracking our performance markers and other things like that, if we're really truly looking to optimize health and longevity for the long term.
Yeah, you're totally right. Well, so I got a question for you that I'm trying to put myself in, like, a typical client or patient's shoes. And one thing that I hear a lot about people who maybe want to work with somebody like myself or somebody like yourself is, well, I don't know how I'm going to afford that, or does my health insurance pay for that type of thing? So like, how do you tend to answer that question when we know the hindrance that, the system, the healthcare system and health insurance system puts on the provider's ability to actually perform and provide care in the way that we're talking about? It's really hard to do when insurance is highly involved. So how do you typically address that question?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's really hard for anybody, I think, to try to wrap your head around or understand how this insurance system works. But I think one of the ways that I try to explain it is the example of how oftentimes, we are an out-of-pocket service, at least right now. we charge a monthly fee or an annual fee.
Mhm.
But a lot of times, if someone were to use us as their primary care, then go to a higher deductible insurance plan, which means they would reduce their premium, then they're often able to save money overall.
Yeah.
So the problem is that when you have a really high deductible insurance plan that you're using for, for primary care, you end up still paying a lot out of pocket initially until you reach your deductible. So for
Right.
example, you may have a basic lab panel that you go and get, and it costs $300 or $400 because the insurance bills that much for it, versus when we send you to LabCorp for your basic lab panel and just pay cash for it, it might cost $20.
Yep.
But unfortunately, insurance marks it up so much, and you're still paying out of pocket for most of those things until you pay down your deductible. So
Right.
either way, you're often still paying a lot out of pocket in addition to what you're paying for insurance.
Yeah.
Now, this is obviously different depending on each person's situation, and obviously what other health conditions you have or how you use your insurance. If you're someone who's on a very expensive medication and you need a more, a better insurance plan to cover those things, then that's different. But for many people who are generally healthy, a higher deductible insurance plan that will be there for you when, if,
True
heaven forbid
accidents
something
happen. Yeah.
catastrophic happens, then you have it. And that's really what the purpose of insurance. But for your general preventive health needs, then paying out of pocket can often be cheaper.
Yeah.
It's just hard to sort of navigate and wrap your head around that when you already are paying for insurance.
Mhm.
And then I think the other aspect of it is really the value. Like if you're going to, your insurance is going to cover a general primary care office, but you're going to get 15 minutes and a prescription, for your symptoms, and that's not what you want, then oftentimes, you think about, is it worth paying a little bit extra out of pocket for getting someone who's truly going to be looking holistically at my health and spending, our first appointment is 55 minutes with patients and getting to know you. And we also heavily use health coaches who are incredible partners with our patients to provide them extra support. So there's a lot more value that comes overall. And so it really comes down to, what are you looking for and what are you willing to invest in it? Now, I think hopefully my goal is that overall someday everybody has access to this type of care, and that it's not a crazy amount of money, especially, and maybe it's more of we're able to actually figure out our insurance system so that we can have a true insurance system for accidents, and that, preventive care is reasonably priced as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting. And, I think that's probably why we got into this. I guess what I'll say is mess in the first place is health insurance, unlike all the other types of insurance out there for your home and your auto and or whatever. All those things are for when accidents happen, right? But we utilize our health insurance for just like normal stuff that should be handled through preventative means and taking care of our body. And then we wouldn't have a lot of the issues that we tend to, have to run to urgent care for, or to the doctor or whatever.
Absolutely. I love the example of the car, right? Like your car insurance doesn't cover your oil changes or your car washes.
Exactly.
And it's the same kind of thing here, but it's, you think about the implications too. I mean, I would hope that we'd be able to prove to insurance companies that if we can keep people healthy, it will save money overall. And so you would think that we'd be taking a more preventive approach, but we're not there
yet. Yeah, not there yet. But folks like you guys at Wild Health, us at Physio Room, we're trying to change that narrative and that landscape a little bit. I oftentimes too will tell people that, and you see this in society, right? If people don't have a lifestyle where they take care of themselves throughout their life, usually those people end up spending a lot of money, or their health insurance plan ends up spending a lot of money on medical care as they get older. I like to live by this idea of, you will either choose to pay for your wellness now, like while you have plenty of years left to live, or you'll be forced to pay for your sickness later in life. Because probably the good chances are something, you're going to have some condition that maybe if you would have exercised more, slept better, eaten better, whatever, maybe you could have prevented that in the first place.
Yeah. It's a hard thing to see somebody in the hospital after they've had their first heart attack. And it's a real wake up call to think, but it's, we all think we're resilient and okay, maybe I'll sleep more next year, or I'll change my diet. later, and eventually these things creep up on you. It's hard because in the moment you often feel fine, but they take years and years to develop. And then you're in a situation that's potentially really scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and sometimes those different like areas or pillars of our life kind of conflict with one another. Like, for example, and I'm going to ask you to maybe expand on these the things that you talked about at that course. The 4 or 5 areas that you talk to clients about a lot. But last night I found myself playing a softball game, and I was having fun with a community of people, getting some exercise in. But it led to me lacking a fair amount of sleep compared to what I normally do. Because by the time I got home and went to bed, it was considerably later than what I normally do. So it's like I benefited on one hand and sacrificed on the other hand to do those things. So,
Right.
but yeah, Julie, would you share with people listening to this, like, the areas of life or the areas of wellness that you talk to clients about all the time, and like how you try to help them balance taking care of themselves in these different areas?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I think that's a great example. I think with all of these come trade-offs. We have to, in all of them, there's maybe an ideal situation, but then we have to remember that life is not perfect. And so it's always constantly making those decisions of what's best in the moment. But I would say sort of the 5 things that I like to focus on most, maybe there are 6 things with patients, would be nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, and relationships. And maybe the 6th one would be purpose also. I think that, just starting with sort of the first 4, nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress. Nutrition's pretty obvious. I think everybody knows that what you eat impacts your health. And we know in general what are the good things for us to eat. We can argue over a lot of the details, but eating real food is really what it comes down to. If we can remove the processed foods, then we're generally going to be much healthier. We can argue about, meat. We can argue about, keto diets and carnivore diets and all of the latest things. But if we start by just eating real food, that's going to be great for almost everybody. And with that, I think the ones that are a little bit sneakier for people are, the quality of our animal products. So, if you're eating animal products, that's eating them that come from as close to their natural environment as possible, like, grass-fed beef, free-range chicken, things like that. Wild caught fish. And then oils are another one that are really tricky, because often, especially if you're eating out, you don't realize what type of oils there are. But the best kind of oils that I think we can focus on eating would be avocado and olive oil for most people. Generally, avocado oil is going to be best if you're cooking with it, because it has a higher smoke point, and olive oil is better for like salads and things like that.
Yeah.
Coconut oil can kind of be a hit or miss depending on your genetics. I think can be a big factor in terms of how much you respond to things like coconut oil. But in a lot of our processed foods are a lot of processed oils too. So those are things to be aware of. And then, there's a lot of talk now about fasting and intermittent fasting.
Sure.
I think that for most people, a 12-hour fast is probably a good place to start. That should probably not even be considered a fast, but it's something that we have to bring up, because I think most people just in the world that we live in are probably doing less than that at night, especially if maybe you work late, you work out after work, you eat a late dinner, and then you're up early the next morning. You might be eating in a shorter window. And that just has an impact on us over time, allowing our bodies that time to really rest and digest and go into more of a repair mode for our metabolism and our bodies is important for things like, metabolism and insulin resistance, but also things like cancer prevention long-term too. And obviously playing around with intermittent fasting can be helpful, or longer fasting at times can be helpful if you're in the right population for it. Obviously, pregnancy, breastfeeding, eating disorders are things you want to be aware of there.
Right.
That's nutrition. And then based on, your specific goals, your genetics, we can get into some of the nuances there, but I think those are the basics. And then the next one's exercise. I think your audience probably knows plenty about this, but
I hope so.
But for me, I think it's all about, I love CrossFit because I think it's it's so simple. It's, constantly varied. It's varied up. Make sure you're not getting in a routine where you're exposing yourself to your body to different demands. It's, functional movements, replicate movements that you're going to see in everyday life. So you're strong in those movement patterns like squatting and pressing and deadlifting. And then high intensity. And I think that looks different for every person,
Mm-hmm.
but doing some sort of exercise that is at intensity is going to help you have the greatest results. And it's also going to be a lot more efficient. But I think there's a role for all types of exercise. I think doing things that are fun. I think incorporating movement throughout the day so that we're not just exercising for 30 minutes or an hour and then sitting the rest of the day is extremely important
Yeah, I
too.
love to talk about that with people, how like, if so many people work on a computer, right? You can't sit at a computer all day long and then sit on your couch at home, sit in your car to drive home and think that,
Mhm.
going to the gym for 45 minutes or walking on a treadmill for 45 minutes is just going to totally counteract all of that. There has to be some other, sometimes I use the term like movement snacks throughout the
Mhm.
day, like
Yep.
things that get you up out of your chair, get you moving, and yeah, exposing your body to different positions.
Yeah. It's a tough, world that we live in now with
Mm-hmm.
Zoom and being on our computers, but finding whatever way it is that works for you, whether it's taking a 5-minute break in between meetings, going for a walk if you can, if you're on phone calls, whatever ways that you can. I think that's very important too.
I think
Um,
sometimes people maybe don't enjoy coming to do an in-person meeting with me because whenever the weather and like their footwear or whatever allows, I kind of pitch the idea like, hey, how do you feel about walking while
doing a
we
walk.
while we
Yeah.
talk? Because
Yeah.
otherwise we're just going to sit here in this office when we could go move around. So
Absolutely. I love it. I love walking meetings. Um, yeah, that's great. Um, I've heard too of people doing these like commutes since people don't commute anymore if they're
mm-hmm.
working from home,
Yeah,
doing like a quick walk around the neighborhood, listen to a podcast or after work, quick walk just to kind of transition your mind from work into
sure.
home life. I think that's a great idea too.
Yeah, I like that idea. You could listen to a cool podcast like this or like Pursuing
Yeah,
Health.
that's right. That's right. So sleep is another one, which, I think now people are really tuning into how important our sleep is.
Yeah.
I think, for a long time, people were so focused on nutrition and exercise, and sleep is, I think, more important than both of those. It's just such an important recovery tool for our bodies. And the implications of short sleep or irregular sleep schedules on our health are really
Mm-hmm.
big. I mean, just going a few nights of short sleep can make us insulin resistant. It's going to increase our hunger. We're going to be craving more carbs or sugar. People who have changes in their circadian rhythm or doing shift work, we know are at a lot higher risk for many different health problems, from metabolic disease to cancer. And
Ah,
some people that they have control over that, some people they don't. So, but the more you can try to minimize the impact of those types of things, the better. I think we have so many tools at our fingertips now with sleep trackers.
mm-hmm.
Um, I think that just making sure, probably the most important thing is just making sure we get a regular opportunity for sleep every night, and as much as possible trying to have a consistent bed and wake time. And I think the wind down routine before bed is really important too. I think we in general live in a culture that's very go 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 all the time. We're, have our email on our phones, we're checking it right up until we go to bed. And I think if you can have some time where you put your phone down, you unwind, whatever it is that helps you relax, whether it's reading a book or just relaxing with your loved ones before bed, I think is really beneficial.
Yeah.
And then with the circadian rhythm, I think, trying to avoid the light, like putting that phone down, not watching TV right before bed, and then in the morning, trying to get some sunlight first thing in the morning and having a regular wake time, I think can go a long way for our sleep as well.
Absolutely. That whole topic right there, just on sleep. And, we've talked about sleep on some other episodes of this show. That is the single reason why I started wearing a Whoop,
Mm-hmm.
was because I knew that I needed to have some sort of data, right? Something to show me so that I could make changes if there was data that said like, oh, you need to make some changes here, which there was.
Yeah.
So I've tried to put some things in place, because I felt like, I sort of already have, for the most part, my nutrition dialed in, at least the majority of the time. I was happy with my fitness and exercise, but I was like, there's got to be some room for improvement on my sleep and on my stress, and like, how can I measure those things? So
Mm-hmm.
some of my friends talked me into wearing a Whoop, and yeah, it's definitely been eye opening on that.
Same here. I also wear the Whoop. I also wear an Aura at night because I like to compare them. But
I remember you saying that. Yeah.
yeah, that's mainly the reason is for sleep for both of them. And I think it's true. What gets measured gets managed. And if we have data to know the quality of our sleep, the amount of deep and REM sleep that we're getting, our HRV, I think those are all really important data points and can help drive our behaviors. And
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that have really changed their habits around alcohol because of wearing one of these devices.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol and caffeine being probably two of the most commonly used substances that interrupt our sleep. And it just makes you think more about when you want to have a drink. And like you said, it's these trade-offs. Like if
Yeah.
sometimes you're out with your friends and you really want to have a drink and you understand that it's probably going to impact my sleep, but I'm okay with it. Other times, maybe you're like, I don't really need a drink tonight, or I don't really want to because I would rather have that good quality sleep.
Yep.
Or
Yeah.
looking
Just
at the timing too,
yeah.
if you have it maybe a little bit earlier or not as much, it might not have the same impact on your sleep. And you don't know for yourself unless you test it and you measure it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely been one of those people who, it just makes you be more intentional about your decisions around
Mm-hmm.
those things. And, sometimes you may make the exact same decision you would have made before, and you have reasons for that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And other
Yeah.
times you make a different decision for different reasons. So, yeah, I think it's been hugely impactful. I'm coming up on my renewal period and stuff. And I think for that sole reason, I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
probably going to renew it again, because it just helps me like keep it being measured and managed, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I just made some of those decisions myself. The last week or so, I have not gotten my usual amount of sleep, but all like day by day made those intentional decisions because of things that had come up that I decided were important for me to stay up for. And I paid for it just as I knew I would. It definitely was feeling it. But last night I finally got a really good night's sleep and feel
yeah,
so much better. So it just, it doesn't mean that you're always going to, make the decision for sleep, but at least you know what you're doing.
mm-hmm. So what do you talk to people about from the stress standpoint, Julie?
Yeah, stress is another one that's really difficult because it's a little bit, um, it's different for every person. And we as humans are not very good at perceiving how much stress we're under. I
Mm-hmm.
think we're all really good at just saying, taking on a lot and being resilient. And oftentimes our bodies don't tell us that we're under too much stress until it's too late and it ends up
Yeah.
in a health condition or, you know, you know, mental health issues or anything like that. So I think, HRV is another marker that I think is extremely helpful for helping people objectively measure their stress.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that there's some validated tools like perceived stress score. That's something that you can use to monitor stress at
Yeah.
different time points and help people see if they're improving or changing. But I think we underestimate the impact. And stress is not just psychological stress. It's not just, traffic and, kids and work and family and things like that. Finances. It's the cumulative stress over your life. And oftentimes it goes back to, total life stress, things that we encountered in childhood that
Sure.
maybe are still impacting us, or at least they're impacting our brains on a subconscious level. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that finding ways, and when I say that, I mean they're impacting our brains in a subconscious level so that we're in a fight or flight mode or in a sympathetic mode more often than maybe we need to be. Evolutionarily speaking, we were all designed to be able to go into this fight or flight mode whenever we needed to protect ourselves. If we're being chased by an animal or we need to protect our family, we can go into that fight or flight so that we can get away from the predator. But then when we're safe, that system turns off and our rest and digest system turns back on. And today, I think so much of our lifestyle triggers that fight or flight mode, whether it's, things that happened a long time ago in our childhood that just put us in this hypervigilant state,
Yeah.
even from things that are not necessarily dangerous right now, or whether it's from our constant emails and alerts on our phones or the busy lifestyle that we have. So finding, and that over time, that impacts our physiology. So it impacts, our psychology. There's a whole field of study called psychoneuroimmunology, which is basically the study of how our thoughts, our psychology, these kind of psychological stressors impact our brains, the way that our brains wire and fire,
Hmm.
and then impact our immune system. So
Yeah.
based on a thought that you have can impact then how your brain responds, the neurotransmitters that are produced, the hormones that are produced, and then how that manifests in your body, how it puts your immune system into sort of a hypervigilant state can lead to inflammation. And down the line, that then leads to a lot of our chronic diseases, things like autoimmune disease or cardiovascular disease, insulin resistance, things like that.
Yeah.
So, there's very good science now to support this, that we have the stress leads to down the road these medical problems. And so the key is, how do we then help our bodies go into this rest and digest state? How do we help our bodies know it's safe? I can relax. I don't need to be in this hypervigilant state where my body's producing all of these hormones like cortisol and all of these things like adrenaline and norepinephrine that are putting myself in this stress state. And
Hmm.
so the more that we can figure out what those things are for us that help us to relax, the better. Sometimes that's changing the balance of, our lives and what we're spending our time on. Sometimes that's just taking time to listen to music or go for a walk in the woods or spend time with our kids or color, or maybe it's something
Yeah.
like mindfulness or meditation. But finding those things that work for you that get you into this rest and digest state are extremely important long term. And I think HRV is a great objective marker that we can use to track. So we know that when your HRV or your heart rate variability is higher, it means that your rest and digest, your parasympathetic nervous system is stronger and you're more resilient. And so
Hmm.
you are going to be able to then handle other stressors that come your way, whether those are psychological stressors or, physical or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that, because you sort of said a lot of different examples of things that may bring you that kind of restfulness. Because the answer is probably a little different for everybody. Just like you
Mm-hmm.
said, care is
Mm-hmm.
individualized. Now, I remember you, and I want to make sure we are respectful of your time. I remember you saying at the event that we met at, that a lot of times you can have all of these different areas in your life, like seemingly in a pretty good
Mm-hmm.
balance, but
Mm-hmm.
still not necessarily feel really good. And the other two things you mentioned, like relationships and emotional health and having purpose,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like layer over the top of these other four things, and are extremely important as well.
Absolutely. And I think those really characterize a lot of, like for me, I've realized how important those are from my personal journey over the last couple of years, where I think so many people who tend to be, go-getters and type A and try to, are always really big in achieving, which is sort of how I've been my whole life. It's always been sports or school or whatever I was working on.
Mm-hmm.
You can chase those achievements, but sometimes miss the point. And I think we can do that with a lot of these lifestyle factors too. You can be so obsessed with getting the right amount of sleep and eating the perfect diet and measuring every macro and meditating every day and doing all the, going in the sauna, like all the health behaviors. But if you're doing it from a place of trying to control and trying to perfect and trying to be kind of perfect in these health behaviors, I think that you may be missing the point. And I think this is
Yeah.
probably a lot of us. It was me. And I think what I've learned through my own personal experience is that what's at the core of all of this is really who you are as a person, your emotional health, your relational health, what you're identifying with your purpose, like what do you feel is your purpose in life, and being able to get a good sense of that, then doing these health behaviors come from more of a place of self-love, of trying to really support yourself and be the best you can be, instead of really being oftentimes having a lot of negative self-talk and trying to kind of control. And so that for me was a big sort of evolution and personal journey, where it comes down to, for me, like healing a lot of relationships. I think for a long time, I was really chasing achievements, and wasn't often paying attention to the relationships that were most important in life. It's healing a lot of thoughts. Like I said, like I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of negative self-talk because I was always trying to be harder on myself than anybody else could be.
Right.
And over time, that really takes a toll. It's the same sort of negative thought loop that then produces all of these stress chemicals that over time then lead to disease. So for me, it's been becoming a lot more aware of sort of my thoughts, my behaviors, my emotions, my relationships, and really strongly identifying with what you feel is your purpose, what's most important to you. And then when you do that, I think a lot of the other health behaviors start to take care of themselves because they become things that you really want to do because it's from a place of loving yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you kind of opening up and being vulnerable about that, sharing like a, a personal experience that you've had with that and sort of like noticing that within yourself, because, I can sort of see some of that in myself. And I know that's probably one of the reasons why I think my wife and I jive so well, because will be that like really type A, like I've got to do all these things and I've got to, track all these things. But she will not miss the point. She always like has the purpose and, the right mindset behind things, even if she's maybe not doing all the other things. And she sort of helps balance me out a little bit that way, I think.
That's good, right? We always need to balance a little yin and yang.
Yep. Yep. Well, before we like really wrap this up, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to share with people. You've been doing a podcast a lot longer than I have, titled Pursuing Health. And I would love for you to share a little bit about like what that show is about, if people want to tune in and check out some episodes that you've done. So what do you guys get into on that show?
Sure. Yeah. So Pursuing Health, I started just after I finished competing in CrossFit in 2015. And it was a way for me to really stay in touch with the CrossFit community and continue that conversation. And it's evolved since then. So initially, it was a lot more about CrossFit and athletes and fitness. And as I've evolved in my medical career, the podcast has also evolved. So now we oftentimes will talk more about health related topics and guests from athletes to doctors to researchers and anywhere in between. So it's called Pursuing Health. And if you want to check it out, please do.
Awesome. Yeah. I've had an opportunity since I met you to check out a couple and read some of the descriptions of, a handful of your episodes. So I would definitely recommend it to you guys that are listening to this. If you like, searching for other podcasts, I know they're really popular. So there's a bazillion podcasts out there, but, life is too short to listen to ones that you don't enjoy. So find one that you really like. Well, Julie, thank you so much for, your time jumping on here and taking a minute to tell us about yourself and Wild Health. So if somebody wants to get more information or wants to, obviously they could probably hop on the internet and just search for Wild Health, but I would love for you to share, maybe like your social media page or ways that people could get a hold of you if they want to find out more.
Sure. The best way to find me on social media is probably Instagram. I'm at Julie Foucher, just my first and last name. And then if you want to learn more about Wild Health, that's wildhealth.com. And the Instagram is at wildhealthmd. And if you would like to check it out, you can use a code GOODHEALTH, GOODHEALTH, that will get you a 30% discount on our plan. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out.
Awesome. We will make sure all of those things are linked in the show notes for you guys to check out. So be sure to stay tuned for more episodes of The Code. Check out Julie and Wild Health online and see if that's something that you would like to find out more information on. Again, Dr. Julie Foucher, thanks for joining me. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Andrew. This was really fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks, you guys. We'll catch you next time.